You ever spend the entire night trying your hardest to fall asleep while you've been awake for over 24 hours? And then at like 2 AM you finally decide to give up and hop on your computer and browse the internet, but just everything feels like a fever dream to you? Almost like the lines between reality and surrealism are becoming more and more blurred and intertwined? Yeah, that's basically the vibes that Aurora Memoria gives off. Aurora Memoria, or the game's full name, Aurora Memoria Philosophical Data Session 2093, is a visual novel / dating sim light that takes on this unique Y2K aesthetic that I've only really seen in a handful of other games. And being that this game released in 2015, several years before the Y2K aesthetic became more mainstream, I'd say that's pretty darn neat. Aurora Memoria is also the name of the 14-song EP that serves as this game's soundtrack. DVI did the music for this game, and prior to playing Aurora Memoria, I only really knew their music from the 2019 puzzle game Crossnick Plus. So going into this visual novel, I was already pretty excited. If I'm being completely honest though, I completely forgot when or how I even discovered this visual novel in the first place. And weirdly enough, there's not really a whole lot of information on the developers of this game, Priztats. It seems like they just dropped this visual novel back in 2015, and then just dropped off the face of the entire planet. Their Twitter account hasn't been active since 2018, and attempting to click on the link to their website leads to an odd assortment of adware websites that exist solely to harvest your information. With most indie games, there's always a good chance that the developers will at some point stumble across your video. But this is all to say that I don't think that will really be the case here. DVI, on the other hand, seemed to be very much live and well. And after taking on the monumental task that was reviewing Halo Infinite last year, I wanted to tackle a shorter game. I wanted to review a game that really wouldn't stress me out all that much. I also will be alternating between calling Aurora Memoria a visual novel and a game. And if you're one of those people who cares about using the right terminology when describing a visual novel, I'm sorry, but my brother in Christ, Aurora Memoria is on itch.io, a platform for video games. Before the prologue chapter of the game even starts, we get treated to this little UI blurb at the bottom asking us for our name. Now, inserting your name in visual novel games isn't exactly anything new. In fact, games in general have been doing this type of stuff long before the visual novel medium started to become more solidified. And before anyone asks, yes, I used to be one of those weird sickos who would actually use their real name on a save file in a video game, just to feel like the characters in-game were actually talking to me. I stopped doing that once I played this one game that got a little too personal and, This visual novel is told from a first-person perspective, so keeping that in mind, I decided to give my character a generic name like Protagonist Kun, or Y/N, or something along those lines. I'm bringing this up because there's a good chance that I'll alternate between those nicknames to refer to the main character of Aurora Memoria. Not like it really should be that hard to understand anyway. Thank God the protagonist is an unlikable dork. Very relatable. The next two questions we get asked is what our blood type is and what our mood is. Now, as far as I'm aware, none of that information will ever actually come up at any point in the actual game whatsoever, at least as far as I know. So the game starts off with you, or our protagonist, waking up in your room. It's here that we get a bit more context as to who our character is in the world around us. The protagonist looks at his acceptance letter, being that it was printed on real paper and sent through a Hydra chute to your former apartment. A huge and unnecessary expense, as it stands a testament to the prestige that accompanies your enrollment at Fuji Academy. It's here that we get introduced to this AI hologram thing named DV Comp, who gives us a bit more exposition as a means to do a bit more world building and to subtly provide us with the little information that we have about who the protagonist is and his or her past prior to now. We don't get much information regarding the protagonist here, besides being a dorky 16-year-old who thinks that using big words will make him seem smarter than he actually is. I really don't like the main character, and I guess I could elaborate on why that's the case later, but for now, we arrive at the academy for the first time and get treated to one of the few smoothly animated cutscenes that this game has. The one I used for the intro to this video. DV Comp shows us our way to our philosophy class we'll be attending, and once we get there, he disappears, leaving us with a slight feeling of isolation. We sit down in our classroom seat and get our introduction to Professor Arakawa, and she remarks that it's so nice to see so many... Okay, stop for a second. I think this is as good a time as ever to talk about one of my least favorite things about Aurora Memoria Philosophical Data Session 2093, and that's the hit and miss writing at certain points. And this isn't even meant to be a jab at the game or anything. I'm well aware that 5 to 6 people tops worked on this project, and making visual novels using the Ren'Py engine is hard fucking work. But there's moments across Aurora Memoria where I find myself stumbling on either cringy dialogue, which, to be fair, I don't think I can judge without being a complete hypocrite, or worse, the liberal usage of big words in sentences that didn't really need them. I know that I already complained about this once already, but I could tell you right now that the last thing that most gamers want when consuming any media is to feel like a complete idiot. And buddy, this visual novel makes me feel like an idiot sometimes. Like, this game constantly has an ace up its sleeve that I know nothing about. It's not something that I can imagine any sane person to understand. It's the feeling that you have when you're fighting a boss in a video game, and you think that you have the upper hand because you figured out the boss's pattern, only for that boss to throw an attack at you that you would have never been able to guess in a million years. And that's essentially how I feel when I have to consult Google every time I see a comically obscure word in this visual novel. And this isn't even a problem in some of the other visual novels that I played in the past. I don't know, let's just chalk it up to me being illiterate for simplicity's sake, I guess. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, Professor Arakawa. She's one of the first reoccurring side characters that we'll meet in this game, and arguably even the main antagonist in certain situations depending on the dialogue choices that you make. Even your AI companion knows that she's the type to have a stick up her ass. Moving on, she gives the class an assignment to define what love is. And at the end of this assignment, she groups up the classmates in pairs of 2 for the following assignment. But before the professor elaborates on what this next assignment is, we get hit with what I could describe as the main multiple choice moment for this entire game, which is choosing your partner for this philosophy assignment. Now, this is where the story branches off into 3 paths, with each path having its own set of scenarios and character development, followed by a singular event that intertwines the 3 paths together, followed by the conclusion of the game. And I think that this is where the main appeal of this visual novel really starts to shine. Despite what my flowchart I made might imply, it isn't like every path leads to the same ending. That would completely suck, to be honest. So here's how this video is going to work. I'm going to be giving a rough plot synopsis of just one of the 3 paths that this game has, while offering my thoughts on certain story beats. And I won't really touch on the other 2 story paths, so basically every video I've ever uploaded to this channel. The reason I'm bringing up something seemingly obvious is because I've structured this review in a manner that should suit 2 types of viewers. The people who don't have any intention on ever playing this visual novel yourself, rest assured, I played essentially 1/3 of the game for you, and to the people who want to play this game but don't want to be spoiled on each ending, I went out of my way to purposefully not analyze any of the story paths ending, to still give you some kind of incentive to enjoy this visual novel on your own. I went out of my way to not literally read every single line of dialogue out loud for this video, word for word, so that this visual novel can retain some value for anyone wanting to give it a go. And hey, I can guarantee you that there's interesting themes to discover that I decided not to talk about in this video. Either way, I'm going to be going over Hisoka's storyline. It's the first story path that I chose out of the three, and out of the other options, I think it's the one that I have the most to talk about. Also, one last thing I should mention is that the vast majority of this review will be from a first-person perspective, being that that's how the visual novel was written. But at some point later, I will switch to a third-person perspective just to kind of switch things up a bit. So let's not waste any more time and cue my next title card. The story branch starts off with you spotting an expressionless girl from across the classroom. Knowing that this girl is going to be your partner for the next project, you go ahead and sit down beside her. She asks you if you're the one that's going to be working with her, and you and this girl introduce each other. The aforementioned girl being Hisoka, and you being Protagonist-kun. Or at least that's what I decided to name my character during this playthrough. Don't judge me, okay? While all of your other classmates around you are talking amongst each other in a carefree manner, you get the sense that Hisoka is different from the rest of your peers. After asking where she came from, she blatantly tells you that she has amnesia, and that she was told by others that it started during the winter of last year. And given the subtitle that this visual novel has, one could assume that this implies that her amnesia started sometime in between November and December 2092. She continues by telling us that she didn't remember anything about her parents before they died, and where she grew up, or even how or why she even enrolled in Fuji Academy. Her first clear memories being spent in the Academy's medical ward, taking tests and being gawked at by a number of doctors. Upon listening to her seemingly unprompted lore dump, you sit back and think about the awkward predicament that you're in. Not sure what to say, you point out that she has a gold iris modification, which in this universe is a tool that tech-savvy computer wizards seem to just have, whether they be a hacker or a programmer. She elaborates on her gold iris mod by telling us that it may have been a reason for amnesia in the first place, whether it was caused by doing something reckless with it or tampering from an outside party is honestly really just up in the air. Any evidence around that could help her figure out her past was either wiped or didn't even exist at all. She concludes by telling us that she can't bring herself to look for evidence of her pre-amnesia life, which, to be fair, is pretty understandable. Of course, I've never experienced amnesia in my entire life, so I can't really speak on what it's like. But I immediately understood what Hisoka meant when she made it clear that dwelling on her own past would do her more harm than good. You're not sure how to respond, as you ponder the possibility of her not understanding things in terms of what is considered surface level and what's deep. But before you could respond to Hisoka's lore dump that she gave, Professor Arukawa butts her smug ass in and breaks up all of the classmates' conversations in order to direct attention back to her. She finally gives us the details on the new project that the class will be working on, essentially being a debate where two students will take a position on what the meaning of love is. And now you know why I decided to release this video in the month of February. She gives everyone in the class the assignment, and we basically have to team up with Hisoka to complete this project. Or Zeitgeist, or James, depending on what story path you chose. You both talk a bit about the project that you will both be working on, agree to meet up later in the week, and then go your separate ways. There's a time skip in the story here, and from what I can only assume to be from Monday to Thursday. It's here that we finally have some room to finally stop and ponder the events that occurred on the day that you met Hisoka. Personally, I think the introduction to her storyline is actually pretty good at being snappy and getting to the point, unlike a certain other story path. Okay, so for this next part, I'm going to stop referring to protagonist Kun from a first-person POV, for no other reason than to shake things up. I've already used enough first and second person pronouns in the scripts to this video to turn it into a dangerous drinking game. Fast forward a few days from when protagonist Kun first met Hisoka, and he seems to be pretty excited about uncovering her past. And it's then that he soon gets a message from Professor Arakawa stating that Hisoka has dropped out of the philosophy course. But hey, at least she's nice enough to allow us to get a deadline extension on the project. Funny enough, this isn't the only story path that Aurora Memoria has that uses this exact plot line almost to a T. But the context and how it's used in other storylines is different enough to make it not come off completely as lazy writing. Just please take my word for it. Anyway, protagonist Kun is at least vaguely concerned for Hisoka. He falls back asleep, and we have another uneventful few-day-long time skip where he explains that he completed the project and learned his way around the academy before he decides to head into the computer lab in hopes that he can at least unearth more information about her past. After all, it isn't like she'll ever find out anyway. So we head in and access one of the archival consoles. I'm sorry, I felt like that FMV sequence was just a little bit too cool to simply narrate over. It's one of the few times we get a full-on animated segment in this visual novel, which is a damn shame because the overall presentation of this game is top-notch stuff. Especially with the sequence where protagonist Kun goes looking through Hisoka's school records only to not really find any vital information about her. I mean, how could you? This is like if I were to look at an abandoned Discord account owned by someone I knew back in middle school, expecting to find information pertaining to right now. As protagonist Kun starts to regret violating Hisoka's personal Right. Even if she already has a sneaking suspicion about what our chucklefuck of a protagonist was up to, she asks us if we're trying to dig up information about her, and it's here that we have a choice, that basically boils down to either telling her the truth or lying to her. However, I picked both choices in the past, and they seem to pretty much lead to the same conclusion, with Hisoka willing to look the other way, and even admitting wanting to look into her own past herself. Protagonist Kun shows his findings to Hisoka while she quietly contemplates everything that she's seen. To sum up the rest of what happens in this scene, Hisoka leaves to gather her thoughts, leaving our protagonist to ruminate on his own emotions. Now, to be fair, I did skip over the majority of the dialogue that took place in this scene, most of which being small talk between our protagonist and Hisoka. I skipped over talking about these parts for the sake of brevity, but I also feel the need to bring them up due to it being the main way that our protagonist starts to form bonds between himself and Hisoka. Remember, this is technically a dating sim that we're reviewing here. It's not like any dating sim I've ever played, but it's listed as one on the itch.io page, so I guess I have to take the people who've made this game's word for it. This is all to say that I actually really do like the moments that we have between our protagonist and Hisoka. I like all of the interactions between the characters in this game, except for a few exceptions, of course. Back to the ongoing story, there's another time skip between the last scene in the computer lab and the next scene in the hallway. Our protagonist fills us in on what's been happening in between that time, noting about not hearing about Hisoka whatsoever for long periods of time being pretty normal, and how he... Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how to feel about Hisoka becoming like a limerent object to the protagonist. I don't even have an issue with that character trait at all or anything, but it's a little weird that details like that don't get a whole lot of attention to them. It's kind of like, oh yeah, I look at pictures of this one girl I like every single day in a very ritualistic manner. Moving on, like no, don't sweep that under the rug. Go back and please elaborate for me on what you even meant by that. But of course, that never really happens. However, what does happen is the protagonist bumping into Hisoka again in the hallway. She ushers you to join her in the computer lab, and once more, upon coming... This is the Sundree Valentine's Day special, everybody. Upon arriving to the computer lab, she tells... Oh my god, I can't. I fucking... Upon arriving to the computer lab, she tells you that she finally remembered something from her past. A memory in which she was in the academy courtyard during the evening. Lanterns and streamers everywhere, but seemingly no one around, with the feeling that she was waiting for someone and getting increasingly worried. Her anxiety contrasting against her calm surroundings. While she's doubting whether or not she's gaslighting herself into thinking her memory was real or made up, protagonist Kun interjects by telling her that she can't be sure about what her priorities would have been back then, stating that her biggest concern is her lack of any actual long-term memory. I guess now's as good a time as ever to honestly come clean to you. The truth is, this is where the script to my original review ended, right here. And the reason for that is, well, I never actually finished this part of the review, completely at least. You see, whenever I work on a review and I hit some kind of writer's block, so to speak, I tend to partake in activities outside of making my videos in hopes that I can gain some kind of motivation to continue working on whatever project I was working on at the time. I'll waste away my days binge watching other people's video essays. I'll play video games that I've always been playing on the side whenever I'm not working on a review for another game, but I have this issue where once I stop working on a video project, it gets to be very, very difficult for me to actually sit back down and work on it once more. Especially if that game is a visual novel like Aurora Memoria Philosophical Data Session 2093. I know that you all are just absolutely dying to hear about how Hisoka's storyline ends, but I think that I was missing the bigger picture here. Let me try and rephrase. I don't think that summarizing one story path that this visual novel has was really the optimal route to go with this review. Maybe I can find a way to approach reviewing other visual novel games like that in the future, but this one is just one of those experiences that is honestly just special enough to where I have to recommend just playing it on your own. I'm serious. And to those of you that are probably thinking,
but Sundree, if the entirety of you summarizing a part of the game's plot was a lead up to nothing, then why even keep it in the video?
And to that, I have to say that it's not a lead up to nothing, and I can get to explaining that near the end of the video, but here, let me set the scene for you. Almost 9 years ago, during the summer months of 2015, I was playing on my Nintendo 2DS a crap ton. Along with sinking hundreds upon hundreds of hours into games like Tomodachi Life and playing Animal Crossing New Leaf online with complete strangers, I'd also use my Nintendo 2DS to access the internet pretty often. The one advantage that my 2DS had over my PC at the time was that it wasn't in the living room where my parents could monitor my activity. I shit you not, there was a point back then when I got banned from using my PC for a week because I was watching a Game Grumps Let's Play of this one game, and my parents walked by when Ross and Aaron were drawing cartoon dicks. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. I highly doubt that this works today, but there used to be this YouTube app that you could get from the Nintendo eShop that would essentially let you watch YouTube videos at 144p quality on your Nintendo 3DS system. And not gonna lie, it was pretty dog shit, even for my low standards back then. But YouTube on original 3DS hardware had a tendency to randomly crash to the home menu at random times, and being too reckless with the UI would result in longer load times. Honestly, this was how I consumed the vast majority of YouTube content from March of 2014 up until 2016. Look, I know this seems super out of context, but just follow me here, okay? During that time in my preteen to early teenage years, I started really developing my taste in content on YouTube. Sure, I'd start off with what most Zoomers my age at the time would watch, like Dan TDM and PewDiePie, but soon enough I'd gravitate towards YouTube channels like MatPat's Game Theory, Did You Know Gaming, Peanut Butter Gamer, and generally the rest of the YouTubers from Normal Boots and Hidden Block.
But Sundree, this is nice and all, but what does this have to do with the topic of the video?
Look, I'm going to get to that eventually, just let me cook, okay? It was really a great time on YouTube for me, finally finding this whole side of the internet that was just as interested in old or obscure games as I was. Anyway, I vividly remember scrolling through YouTube on my Nintendo 2DS one night and coming across this one Japanese Nintendo video. I forgot which one it was specifically, but I remember it being gameplay footage from the character creation of Fire Emblem If. Fire Emblem If eventually being renamed to Fire Emblem Fates outside of Japan. But this was back during the middle of 2015, when the game first released in Japan, but the English localization still wasn't out yet. Now, at the time, I'd consider myself to be an avid Fire Emblem fan. I picked up and beat Fire Emblem Awakening a couple of months prior and was interested enough in the franchise to make it my hyperfixation for a bit. Even going as far as to play shoddy English translations of the Super Famicom games in the series on, well, dodgy online emulator websites. But that's a story for another day. I eventually picked up a copy of Fire Emblem Fates when it finally released in America. I picked up the Birthright version of the game because aside from me deciding that Selkie was going to be my waifu for the next couple of years,
hey yo, what the fuck?
I was told by some Sereness Forest users that Birthright was the best version of the game to buy if you ever planned on getting all of the versions of the game. To elaborate, Fire Emblem Fates was the first Fire Emblem game in the franchise to feature not one, not two, but 3 separate story paths. But the catch is, if you buy one, you have to buy the other 2 in order to experience the whole story. This was a pretty controversial move at the time, especially considering that the third and final path, Revelation, didn't have a physical version attributed to it like Birthright or Conquest. Well, not if you count the special edition, which had all 3 story paths on the same cartridge. That was the root of the discourse at the time. Nintendo and Intelligent Systems could have put all of the paths on the same cartridge, but chose not to in order to maximize profits. Or at least that's how I remember it. By the way, yes, I am going completely off of memory here and nothing else. However, I was a broke 14-year-old, so I never really got to experience the third and final path that the game had to offer, Revelation. Fire Emblem Fates, much like Aurora Memoria, Philosophical Data Session 2093, is a game that features 3 distinct story paths, each with their own characters that just so happen to also cameo a little bit in the other story paths where they're not the central focus. These are both 2 games where the central theme is 3 story paths, and these are both 2 games that released in the same year, 2015. But that's about where the coincidental connection between these 2 games start and end. Aurora Memoria has 3 different endings for the 3 paths, adding up to a total of 9 possible endings that you can get. However, I kind of had a hard time getting those alternate endings. Even when I ran multiple playthroughs for the same story path, I'd still end up getting what was essentially the same ending. I know for a fact that this game has 9 endings. One of the endings that I never got to see is literally in a screenshot featured on this game's itch.io page. Another piece of evidence that supports my point is when I went snooping around in the game's files. Now, I know that people might have some kind of ethical concern about me digging through the game's internal files, but come on, this visual novel's been out for almost a decade, and the developers, Priztats, don't really seem to be in commission at this point. Besides, I've always been a sucker for any content in games that's on the cutting room floor. Anyway, among other discoveries I made, like some of the concept art of the main characters that looks nothing like the final game's art style, I found a peculiar set of files: Hisoka Faint and Hisoka Faint Lights. So, to quickly explain how most background animations in this visual novel works, it's not an actual video file, but a series of rapidly moving PNGs. Take for example the main menu screen. It's just a rapid slideshow of images to give the illusion of animation, kind of like a GIF, but not quite. So in these Hisoka Faint files, we find a series of images that form an animation of someone falling to the classroom ground from a first-person perspective. Now, I'm not sure if the scene is actually in the final game or not, but what I am sure of is that this very much implies that even after going through all of the story paths that this game has to offer, there is still very much stuff that I missed out on, even after multiple playthroughs and thinking that I knew this visual novel inside and out. And in all honesty, I'd say that's pretty darn neat. So to wrap this video up, if you want to give this visual novel a go, it's for free on itch.io. I'll even drop a link in the description to make it a bit easier. But if you don't want to, that's alright as well. I know that visual novels as a genre aren't exactly for everyone, and if you watched this video to this point, I honestly wish I had the words to express my gratitude, and if you were to hit that like and subscribe button, I definitely wouldn't object to that. I would love for you to join me in my ultimate desperate struggle in the YouTube algorithm. Oh yeah, one last thing. I made a new Twitter account because my old one failed Elon's vibe check. I post random stuff there, including updates on upcoming videos. Please give me a follow to boost my serotonin levels. Okay, bye bye.
Sundree. 1, and then comes the 2 to the 3 and 4. Then I drop the beat I have in store. Lay the lyrics on the top like a rug. Make it sound smooth and later make a dub. Enunciate well, so that you can tell. I am not illiterate, no, not even a little bit. Nothing like an idiot. Get it? You want the record? Cool, I'm with it. Let the rhythm, 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 funky. Let the rhythm, let the rhythm, let the rhythm. the rhythm take you, take you, take you, take you, take you.